Right, depending on how you know me, you will see a different side to me. My family see me one way. I think they think I'm usually a little bit batty. My friends know other parts of me, which also depends on how long they've known me for. And so it goes on. Everybody knows you with one hat or another on. And I also acknowledge that there are some people in the room who might never have seen or heard me before, in which case, hi, I'm Claire Walton, and I'm one of the elders at Westlake. But there are also facts about us. So I've been in Switzerland for about 8 years now. I'm British, married to Derek, with 3 far too grown-up children who live in the UK. And I also, just bizarre point, I did a degree in polymer chemistry and technology. You can all ask me about it. I'll not be able to answer you a single word on it anymore. I've forgotten it all. But whilst I've told you that, and it might mean afterwards that you remember some of those facts, and you could start to have a conversation about them, areas of your lives as well, those facts might or might not create a bond between us. It doesn't mean you'll know me, but it might allow for that to start. So today we are looking at 3 parables that are all really well known. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son. And maybe we can begin to find ourselves and who we are in relation to God through those parables and learn more about so we know who we are. Did you know that once a sheep is lost, it will remain lost unless somebody tries to find it? Whereas many animals have a homing device in their brain, a sheep doesn't. They're very much communal animals and are hopeless if they lose the sheep that they're following. They kind of go off in a different direction. Sheep will also follow a lead sheep, who I don't know how he decides he's a lead sheep because he doesn't know what he's doing, but they will follow a lead sheep over a cliff and never stop. They'll just go. It makes me wonder if when Jesus sent the demon into the herd of pigs, he knew exactly what he was doing because people had already seen sheep doing it, so that wouldn't have seemed so unusual. And to say to somebody that they're sort of like a sheep is not something that they like to hear. There was watching a program a few weeks ago where somebody was described as a sheep, and oh my life, he fell apart. Absolutely fell apart. He basically lost it at the point that somebody would think that he could follow what other people were saying. I'll almost go as far as to say that he unravelled himself. But once lost, the only way to get it back is to go and find it. So leaving the 99 behind to find the one is more poignant when you realise that the one will never make it back otherwise. And the song The Reckless Love states that Leon, leave the 99, go and find that one. Jesus uses the parable to remind people that one is worth it. That as the shepherd searches for the lost one, so he will seek the lost one amongst us. And when they return, we should celebrate. Now, some of us will identify with the lost sheep. We will know that feeling of being reclaimed by God, being found once more whole. We will remember how we began to know our identity as a child of God because God searched for us as that sheep. But maybe your finding God was more like the lost coin. Now, I spent hours, and I am not joking here, absolutely hours, looking for a piece of paper at my mother's house. My mother's filing system is bad, to put it lightly. And finally, when I was having spent hours looking for this, I happened to think I'd go and see if she had any birthday cards, because I needed to send one to somebody from her. And I opened up the birthday cards, and there was the piece of paper that I needed. And I sort of triumphantly did a found it text to my sister, which was really my shout of joy, absolute, that I'd finally found this piece of paper. The woman knew what she was looking for, but so often we actually don't. We kind of are searching for something, searching for that coin. We don't quite know what that coin is. We are just looking for that purpose, that meaning to life. And maybe that's how you were found by Jesus. You met Jesus when you realised what you had been looking for was him. When many parts of your life joined together as he found you, or as you found him. I've always wondered if that's a thing that happened with the likes of Peter, James and John, because we never hear about their trials as we do of Paul, but instead Jesus called them and they left their nets. Was it because Jesus was who they had been looking for? So thus far we can get out either how we found Jesus or how Jesus found us. Now, I think it's fair to say that some of us at many points of our lives will have identified with the parable of the lost son. If you've been a Christian for a long time, you'll have heard it so many times. With that picture of the father running out will always have been pointed out. So many times this is a parable used to all about the younger son, how he demands everything, and not on the older one who forgets to ask for anything. Now, I would say that neither the younger son or the older son really knew who they were. But just for a moment, imagine that we are the crowd listening to Jesus. We imagine the gasps and the owls as he says things. He starts strong. The younger son demands and receives an inheritance. Jesus knew who he was talking to at that place, as he does today. When Jesus presented the parable of the prodigal son, tax collectors and sinners were in the crowd that drew near in order to hear what he had to say. But there were also scribes and Pharisees in the audience who came with that grumbling attitude and critical heart. Jesus masterfully created a story that addresses exactly what both the sinners and the religious leaders needed to hear. So let's hear a little bit about the prodigal. He spends money and resources freely and recklessly. He is wastefully extravagant. He has no regard for anything which does not allow him to have fun. Although at this point he'd probably say he was free, he is discovering himself. And if some get hurt in the process, well, that happens, doesn't it? I think we all know the sort of person who's on that free, I'm so free and whatever. But as time goes on, he begins to realise that maybe his life is not the bed of roses that he had planned. And that as his money goes, so does any stature he has in the little community he's formed. His friends disappear. His playboy status goes, and his freedom takes a distinctly bad turn as he starts to look after the pigs and eat their pig swill. And then the older son, well, he's different. He is committed to being more respectable. He doesn't need to self-discover because those around him will tell him how marvellous he is already and what a good son he is. He is on a programme of self-salvation. He has good standing with the community and hopefully has favour with his father, although he doesn't really talk to him very much, so he wouldn't know. I don't think he would see himself as free. He has too many commitments. So I think it's fair to say that both the younger and the oldest brother are lost. Now, the tax collectors and sinners in the audience could readily see the similarity between their lives and that of the prodigal son, because he had wasted his life on sinful pleasures, and they were always being accused of that. And he'd found himself in the lowest of states. And to be honest, they weren't overly looked after in the community. They weren't seen as good people. The only way back for the prodigal was to eat humble pie and return. Admittedly, he had badly failed, and he had to throw himself at the feet of his father. But rather than rejecting his son, the father doesn't really allow him to apologise. He's just so happy to see him and accepts him back as his son. I expect there would have been a cheer at that point in the crowd. Put the best robe on him. Kill the fattened cow. My son was dead. He is alive. Let's celebrate. Now, as we know the story, the spotlight shifts to the older brother, who, wouldn't you know, was out working in the field. By contrast to the prodigal son, the older brother was a paragon of virtue. You know the type, don't you? The overachievers. They kind of sometimes get a bit on your nerves. The older brother had faithfully remained at home, serving his father. But he was not happy at the least. As he came home from the field, he heard music and dancing. And asking a servant what's going on, he hears that his father has thrown a party because his younger brother has returned. He's angry and refuses to go inside. Your brother has come home and your father's killed the fatted cow, is what he'll hear. Of course, none of this made sense to the older son, because his brother had made a stupid mistake. He disgraced the family name, jeopardised all their futures by having to sell half the land, forsaken his heritage, and as far as the son was concerned, he'd gotten what he deserved. So the older brother stopped by the fence and stood there, looking at disdain at the party that had been thrown. And his father saw him and went out to try and coax him back. He definitely wasn't happy with his brother, though. This prodigal son had returned and been welcomed. Maybe, if his brother had returned and his father treated him as the lowest of the low, then maybe he would have been happier. He would at least have been able to lord it over his brother and show him his mistakes. And that's actually where the parable ends, with the father and the older son standing by the fence together. The father's invitation extended, come join the party. And the older son's response, well, I'd say hanging in the balance. Now, too often we do miss the party because of similar issues to the ones that the older brother exhibited. We don't want to share the joy of those who've been lost being found, even though we were once in their shoes. Well, let's look at the father. So the father, with a heavy heart, actually hands his share of the the younger son his share of the inheritance. His younger son is dispensing with him. He is deemed not relevant to that young man's life. The son wants fun. He wants friends. He wants to party. He wants his freedom without strings attached. And that means ditch dad. For the older son, he doesn't seem to be in a particularly good relationship either. The son just thinks he needs to keep his head down, keep working, fume that he's still trying to keep everything together, even though his younger brother has ruined half the estate. But safe in the knowledge that once his father dies, everything is his. But let's listen to what the father says and how he reacts to each son on the day of that party. But while it's still a long way off, the father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. You do get the feeling that conversations might have happened later as to what actually happened while he was away. But at this point, it's irrelevant. Joy at the return of the son takes everything else. The father just wants to draw him close and allow him to once more breathe. Now, Jesus is speaking to the crowd here. He is speaking to those who think the chances of God accepting them as pathetic sinners is zero. To be accepted as a son was not even in the mindset of the tax collectors and the sinners. Yet here Jesus offers it. because the prodigal son returns with a heart full of need for the father, that desire to be wrapped in him, but really not expecting him to surround him with love. And yet here the father accepts him and makes him whole again, and then throws a party. You can imagine the sinners and tax collectors sitting up and beginning to take note. Is he talking to us? Is there really an option that we will be welcomed? Even if God knows what we've done? Wow, a way in. What do we need to do? And we have seen in the Gospels before that Jesus speaks to the tax collectors who have been redeemed. Read about Matthew and Zacchaeus. But for the older son, he is striving to be accepted. He thinks that only his good works will make him worthy of the love of the Father. He is self-righteously furious with the Father and will not accept that surround. The older brother becomes angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. When he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes come home, you kill the fatted cow for him." "My son," the father said, "you were always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Rather than letting the father comfort and embrace him to bring him in, the older son would rather mutter in a corner. Whilst his whole life could have been a celebration with his father, truly living as the heir, he was too bound up with everything around him and slights he felt that had been dealt to him. You can imagine the Pharisees and scribes sitting there, bristling even more. Jesus surely was making fun of them because he knew how hard it was to keep yourself ritually clean and follow so many rules in all areas of your life. Even today, there are those who regiment all their lives in order to be deemed worthy of coming to God. So is he really comparing us to sheep and then coins and now ungrateful sons? When actually, what he said is, you need to come to me in humility. But some were beginning to realise that they needed to listen and rethink. Look at Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, who gave his tomb to Jesus. And at times, we probably could identify with the young son or the upright older son. You can be a rebel. You can be too bound in law. But Jesus wants us to identify that without the Father, who everything comes from, he is the one who makes you into what you need to be. He wants that crowd to see that we have a Father who wants to bring us home where we can be fully children of God. In 1 John 3 it says, "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called the children of God." And that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us is that it never did know him. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not yet been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he does. And then we shall truly know who we are.